Hey, my name is Jordan and welcome to our online service. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know about our in-person Sunday morning service at 10:30. If you are ever in our area, we'd love for you to come and worship with us. But today, let us know where you're watching from. We love reading all the comments. Now, I am so excited for you to hear today's message, so let's jump right in.
We have been in this series that I have been thoroughly enjoying. I don't know how long we're gonna stay in this time series because what I realized is you can really apply time to anything. And I actually have a sub-series in the series now called Stop Wasting Time in the time series. So we might be here all of 2021. But it's good. We've been having fun, right? We've been having a lot of fun. A quick little recap if you've missed out. The first week we talked about dancing. The second week we talked about giving birth. And last week we talked about the Matrix. So there's it. That's what we've been doing so far. No, I'm kidding. We've actually been talking about the verse in Ecclesiastes that says for everything that there is a season, that there is a proper season for things in our life. There's a proper season. So for everything, there's a season and there's a time for every activity under heaven, that God's time is ordained and God's on it. God's got a plan and God's got a purpose. So the first week, that's what we talked about. We talked about that thing that you're waiting for God to do and this door that you're waiting to open. Maybe it's just not time yet. And we talked about how it wasn't even time for Jesus to do his first miracle because maybe even though it looks like to us, it's time, God's still saying, hold on just a minute, maybe it's just not time yet. And in the second week, we talked about while we're waiting for it to be time, we gotta make sure that we're getting ready. So when it is time, we'll be ready. So we talked about the day by day and just doing the right thing every day while we're waiting on God to open the doors. And as we're faithful to God, he's being faithful to us. And then all of a sudden the moment comes and it's time. So that was the second week. And then last week, my husband, Pastor James, shared and did incredible. That's where y'all clap. If y'all want me to do it more, we gotta clap more. James is kind of introverted. He doesn't love speaking, but he always does such an amazing job. In fact, I preach and a few of you are like, great job, Pastor Steph. When he preaches, 50 people will come to me and go, oh my gosh, Pastor James just did amazing. And I don't tell him any of that. He'll go get in the big head. So he really does a great job and he shared and it was awesome. And he talked about what do you do when you can't control time? There's one thing that you can control and that's your attitude. That's how you act and how you feel during that time. And so this week I kind of wanted to jump off of that a little bit and talk a little bit more about the tough seasons. Right? Those tough seasons that you don't want to be in and you don't like that you're here, right? How many of you guys have been in a tough season, you're in a tough season? All right, so everyone that's not raising their hand, if they're under the age of 3, it's probably okay. But if they are over the age of 3, check their pulse, make sure they're living. Because we all go through tough times and tough seasons. It's just part of life. And I know that doesn't sound very spiritual, right? Because as Christians, we never go through anything hard and difficult and everything is perfect. I would love to say that's what Christianity is. But when I look at the New Testament, it's not always like that. Jesus' life was rough, and so was the disciples. They went through some crazy times, right? And there's a couple of scriptures in the Bible that I just don't really like. Let me share those with you this morning. The first one's out of 1 Peter chapter 4. It says, dear friends, starts friendly. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going to go through, as if something strange were happening to you. Like, what'd you say, Peter? Fiery trials? Like, hold on a minute. I didn't sign up for fiery trials. And so, but maybe it's just Peter. Maybe Peter's just in a mood, right? And Peter's just had a bad day. But then I found some red letters. Red letters are when Jesus is speaking. And in the red letters in John, it says this, I have told you all of this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. I feel like maybe when they were translating it, something got mistyped. It shouldn't say you will, right? It's you might, or you probably won't. But it doesn't. It says that you will have many trials and sorrows, and I don't like that. I don't like it at all. How many of you like going through tough times? It's terrible, right? right? It's just, like who likes that? But here's the painful truth, you guys, is that tough seasons may just be the seasons when we develop the most. It's in the tough seasons that we really do develop the most. I'd love to say in my life, it was the good times that I really developed. I was having the time of my life and I was growing at the same time. It was also wonderful. Something we say around here a lot is you can't be comfortable and grow at the same time. And so those uncomfortable seasons that we don't really like are usually the seasons in which we're growing the very most. And so today I want to talk about just our perspective. When people say, how are you doing? You don't say, I'm going through a tough season. We're going to say that we're growing through a growth season. Christy knows, we're going through a growth season. But the thing is, for us to look at it that way and have that perspective, we're going to have the attitude that takes heart in the idea that we're going into a growth season. And this is good, right? And here's what Jesus said about that same verse. I have told you that you might have peace in the world. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows. And then Jesus says this, but take heart. Take heart, which means to be confident and filled with joy, because I have overcome the world. Take heart, I have overcome, and you can be confident in knowing this is all working for the good. We're going somewhere here. And that's what today is about. Today is about just that awareness and to know and trust that God is going to work all things out for good. Not that God brought the tough season, but that he is absolutely using everything for good. God is always working things out for our good. And God will use this tough season to produce in the next season. This trial season, this tough season might be something that God uses to give you a test season. A test season. And I was thinking about those words in the Bible. Sometimes we hear the Bible talk about trials. We hear it talking about temptations. We hear it talking about testing. And so before we jump in today, I wanted to kind of define this a little bit this morning about what are these trials that God talks about all the time. And trials are something that just happen. Do you know that sometimes bad things just happen in life? Do you know that we're all free-willed people living in a fallen world, and sometimes poop just happens, right? Sometimes it just happens. And so a trial is life's curveballs. It's the chaos. It's the things that we can't control. It's the things that we can't expect. But what we do through that trial is going to define if that was a tempting season or a testing season. See, temptation is something that the enemy uses while you're in the tough season to tempt you. Shoot, the enemy will use temptation when you're in a good season. It's not defined just to the trial season. But temptation is also what happens when we go through a tough season and we're tempted to give up. We go through a tough season and we're tempted just to throw in the towel. We go through a tough season and we're tempted to go back and pick up maybe old habits or responses that we've laid down before. That's what temptation is. But testings are what God does with the trial seasons. Testings are the tough seasons where we grow those deeper roots. Testing is when we get to be mature. Testing is when we grow the deep roots. And so because of that, we're more confident on who we are and more confident on who God is. That's the testing seasons. So the deal is, guys, we don't get to pick the trial if we go through a trial or not. But what we do get to pick is what we're going to do with that trial. If it's going to be a tempting season or a testing season. And that's something that actually happened to Jesus before he would start his ministry. Now, Jesus was appointed years ago as a child that he would become the Messiah. He would do miracles. He would do all these things, but he kind of sat dormant for years. And we've talked about that this past few weeks. So here Jesus is, and he's sitting, he's about to launch his ministry. And it says that God himself led him into the wilderness for the testing. He led him into the wilderness to see, is he mature enough? Are we ready to move? And it says this in Matthew, it says that he took him in, the Holy Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to experience an ordeal of testing by the accuser. And after fasting for 40 days, Jesus was extremely hungry. And then the tempter came to him. I love that it says Jesus was really hungry. because I can get on board with that. Like, I'm really hungry a lot. Believe it or not, like, I'm hungry all the time. And this past weekend, I have been doing a cleanse and trying to cleanse myself and be a little bit more healthy. I don't always make really healthy choices, and I was doing this cleanse, and you know what happened? I have been in a mood. James yesterday multiple times kept going like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I'm just in a mood. I couldn't even define it. I just was completely defeated. I was hungry, and the tempter was there, and he was telling me that I was trash, okay? And I just felt terrible because I was hungry. So I love that Jesus, at least for me, I feel this verse. Like, yes, I know Jesus was hangry. I get that. I've been there. And when I feel that, I am very susceptible to outside influences. Right? My walls are down. I am not guarded, and my heart is just wide open, ready to be ripped apart because I am hungry. And so here's Jesus, and he's hungry, and it says that the tempter came. And the tempter was the enemy, the accuser. The devil was coming to Jesus, and he was trying to get Jesus off track. Here Jesus is, he's in the wilderness, he's in a trial, he's fasted for 40 days, he's hungry, he's lonely, he's tired, he's been sleeping on rocks. If Jesus even slept, I don't know, he did because he was a man, so yeah, he was sleeping on rocks and he was hungry. Like, that's bad. Like, we didn't barely make it through Snowvid very long before we got all stressed out, right? So here's Jesus, no electricity and no food, 40 days, right? Y'all with me? And then the tempter comes, and he begins to just give things to Jesus, thing after thing after thing, to tempt him and get him thwarted during this trial. But looking at Jesus as the example, it says that this became a test for Jesus. And upon going through this time with the tempter, Jesus came out of this season in the wilderness, this frustrating, terrible season, and instead had passed the test, meaning he was ready for God to move. So we do go through these testing seasons. These hard seasons are gonna come. And I feel like it's important that we're clear on this, that God never tempts you. That's not God's play. He's not trying to bring you in here and tempt you to see what you're going to do. But in life, you're going to be tempted, and there's going to be seasons where you have different options on how you want to walk through this. You can be tempted, or you can be tested. And so God's not the tempter. In fact, it says this in the book of James. It says, and remember when you're being tempted, do not say that God is tempting me, because God doesn't do that. God is never tempted to do wrong, and he never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. So it's those temptations that tempt us to give up, right? We talked about this, to throw in the towel, just to quit. It's the temptations that say, I'm gonna pick up my old habits. I'm gonna leave my wife and my dog and my kids, right? That's the temptation where the enemy is trying to get you off God's plan. He wants you to fail the test. He wants you to go through a trial season and come out defeated and discouraged and not living out the best that God has for you. He wants that. And I think we need to be aware that when we go through these seasons, that there is a stronghold that's trying to pull us away. There's something that's trying to get in between us and God. And so what we do with this season is up to us. And sometimes, like I said, we're tempted to do all these things, but instead of being tempted, I think it's time for us to realize, let's get tested. Let's get tested, and I think probably in our narrative right now, no one wants to get tested because that could mean something really bad right now. But what it could mean in this season is when you get tested for something, that means you're ready for promotion, right? Like when you go through school, every time that you take a test and you pass the test, that means that you're ready to be promoted to the next level. Because all of the things that you need to go into the next level, you now have, and now that you've tested, you're confident you have that skill to go to the next level to build on these skills even more, right? So we have testing in our schools. We have testing in our sports, right? From the time kids are little, they all start in Little League or T-ball and the pitching machines and all those things, right? But then they continue to pass the test at their level, and then they level up. Because their skill set has grown, their maturity has grown, their strength has grown. And if a child continues to test up, he might start at T-ball and end up in Major League Baseball, right? Because each level that he passes, he gets to level up because he's ready, right? So there's testing in the workplace. You do not get promoted at work because you've just been hanging out on Easy Street and just been doing a good job over there, right? You get promoted at work when you have consistently showed up and done the right thing. You get promoted at work when your work has some weird stuff going on. Maybe there's some fighting in the coffee room, or maybe there's this or that, and you consistently show up and know what to do in that situation. You pass that test, and then you get promoted. That promotion is recognition that you're ready for more. That's what the testing is about. And you gain a lot during testing. There's a lot that you gain, and there's really not more greater lessons in life than experience. Just going through it. Just the experience. And it was something interesting when I started pastoring here. My dad had written all these mini books. And so I was reading through all those mini books, and I was so excited. And I found this mini book, and it was called Experiencing God. And I was like, oh, this one's gonna be so good. It's gonna be just chocked full of these hopeful stories and how amazing God is and all the great things that God did, right? It's called Experiencing God. That sounds awesome. But when I cracked open the book, it was just full of scripture after scripture that was saying you gotta go through the tough times because that's when you experience God the most. It's during the trial or the test that you're actually experiencing God. He said this phrase, and I've held on to it. He said, experiencing God is the most important thing you'll ever do. It's the most important thing because once you experience God in your life, it will change your trajectory. It'll be something that you hang on to forever. It's like God imprints himself on your life in those moments. And for many, you've had moment after moment of experiencing God. And those experiences are what carry you through. But if we're honest about those experiences don't often come during the good times. They're more likely to come during the tough times. Because I think it's the tough times that draw us to a special desperation to hear God's voice. Now, sometimes the tough times are the times that we get the most frustrated and we're the most tempted. So we're tempted to distract ourselves. We're tempted to divide ourselves from God and maybe blame him for the trial season. But for many and some, it's a season that you actually draw in closer because you want to hear him more. You want to feel his presence more. And those are the times that you experience God. And it really is. It is way easier to experience God in the tough times than it is the good times. It's way easier to experience God there. And here's what Paul said in Romans. He says, we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials. For we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character. And character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. And this hope will not lead to disappointment. Man, it's in those seasons that we learn to endure that our character's being developed. And then as our character is being developed, we're finding this new confidence. And not only us, but in our Savior. And we're going like, man, God, there's a new hope inside of me. Because God, now going through this season just made me realize how strong I really am. Going through this season just made me realize how strong and capable you really are. Going through this season, God, I thought I would never make it out. And the fact that I'm standing on the other side, I can say only God could have got me here. That's experiencing God. Man, that's life-altering change in your life. A few years ago when I first started pastoring, it's probably about 4 years ago now, I was getting ready one day in my bathroom, and all of a sudden God said to me, he goes, I'm going to expedite this. And in that moment, I knew what that meant. My second reaction was like, cool, expedite, promote our church, move it on quickly. Yes, God, that sounds amazing. But that only lasted about 1 second because I knew God well enough to know that if he was going to be expediting the journey, we would be expediting the testing. And the first year of my time here pastoring, we really went through the craziest year. It was so many unique and unusual things happening. Really just for our world today, the past 3 years have just been crazy. They say that pastors will lead their church through one crisis about every 20 years. I've only been here 3 years. We've already had 3 crises. So I don't know if it's me, but here we are. We're in crisis 3, but just that first year alone, not necessarily big crisis, just things happening here in our church. I think I shared a few weeks ago when there was a guest speaker that was supposed to come that brought a really big crowd and kind of didn't come at the last minute, and I had to really pull from within and preach out of nowhere. And we just had some hard things happening that first year. And man, we would go through these things and I would be so scared or so nervous or so unqualified or unprepared. But every time I went out of that season and took care of that thing and went to the next, I actually grew a little bit taller. Every single season, I just continued to grow and grow. And as I grew, my confidence grew. And the things in year 1 that were so crazy and I can't imagine going through, now in year 3 or 4, I'm like, oh, I got that. I can grow into this. That was something that David said right before he fought Goliath. He said, I can fight Goliath because I already fought the lion and I already fought the bear. So that gives me confidence now. Oh, I can take Goliath. Man, I think sometimes we think that we're ready for Goliath, but what we haven't gone through is the experience of testing, the experience where we learn to have confidence in ourselves and in God, and to know that God is working in all things. It's that experience that we need. That experience in the test. And for me, that season of testing that I was going through, man, it just seemed like every time I would solve one situation, another one would pop up. To be honest, actually one summer, I think it was 2019 maybe, I actually prayed for a break. I said, God, I really do want to expedite this ministry, but this testing season for me, just give me a minute. And I prayed that, and it was like for 3 months, everything was really peaceful. And then I had to go, okay, God, I'm ready to go back at it again. Keep testing us, God. Keep putting us through the fire because we know when we come out, we're gonna come out victorious. God, put us through this test, God, because you're doing something. You're refining me. You're refining us in this process. So God, this is a good thing. And I love Paul because he's such an honest person, the Apostle Paul in the Bible. He's such an honest person, and I love you can kind of watch his journey. At the beginning, he's like, oh, this is really tough. I keep doing things I don't want to do. I don't really like this. But then you follow a little bit further, and he gets to this season in his life, and he goes, I'm now so confident because I've learned how to be complacent and happy in all things. And when Paul was writing this, he was writing this in a jail cell. And he was going, now I've learned to have joy and peace in everything because now instead of looking at what you're not in, I can't help but see that you're in everything. Man, you've got me in a prison here and you've got these guards that are coming every 8 hours and switching out. Now, God, you've given me 8 hours to speak life and hope into these guards. And guess what? Those guards have the ear of the king. I'm speaking life and hope and God's message into these guards 8 hours a day, and they're going to tell the king. I could never have that much influence outside of these walls, but here in this prison. But see, Paul knew about perspective. Paul knew about the testing seasons because he'd gone through them. And he knew that through those testing seasons, that's when he would experience God. He knew in those testing seasons when he would endure, his character would be developed and he was being refined. So in the next season, he could do even more. Paul welcomed him. That's what he said here. He says, we can rejoice too. And I was thinking about that. We're going through these tests sometimes, like it or not. We're in a trial sometimes, and we got to go through. So what do we do when it's test time? Well, we do like Paul said. I like the way that James said it. James said, be very happy about it. So first and foremost, if you're going through a trial season, the Bible says to be very happy, right? That's encouraging, right? We're just gonna be happy, right? Here's what James said. My brothers and sisters, be very happy when you are tested in different ways, because you know that such testing of your faith produces endurance. There it is again. And you endure until the testing is over. because then you will be mature and complete and you won't need anything. As you are going through this testing seasons, you're becoming more mature. You're becoming more complete. One translation says that you'll be perfected. It's the perfection process that we're going through. And we're testing out of each season to get promoted into the next season. It's that perfection process. And Jesus talked about the process that sometimes we go through in our faith. He talked about the people that go through tough seasons and sometimes they can't make it. He referred to it as the rocky ground. Here's what he said in Matthew. He said, those on the rocky ground are the ones who receive the word with joy. They're all excited, they're ready. Test me, God, I'm ready for the trials. But they have no root. And they believe for a while, but in the times of testing, they fall away. And another way it was translated were the winds of testing. When the winds of testing would come, that they would fall away. I heard this story about a Biosphere Project. It's called Biosphere 2. Have anybody heard of that project? I think it was started back in the 80s, maybe 1984 to 93. But what they did is in Arizona, they built this 3-acre dome that would replicate Earth. And they were trying to do some studies and investigations that they were to go and replicate Earth on another planet. How would it work? So they made everything to every detail exact. They brought in plants, they brought in dirt, they brought in all different things. They actually had 7 different biomes. So they had, like a savanna, a wetlands area. They had 7 different biomes that they would just build this paradise and perfect. And they brought in all these species and it was great. And so they were running these testings on it and they began to plant things. And they were amazed at how quickly the trees were growing in this biosphere. The trees were just shooting up like double time to what they would normally shoot up outside. They were growing so fast. But all of a sudden, right before the trees would get to full mature height, the trees would just fall over and they wouldn't stand. And they realized that in this process, they had simulated everything that you would have in the earth, but they didn't simulate the wind. And without those winds of testing, those trees were not diving and they weren't building deep roots. Sure, they were being promoted quickly. They were moving to the top really quickly. But without those roots, as soon as they got too big, they could not withstand their own weight. And I think sometimes in our season, we want to shoot up like that. We want to be in this biosphere. Everything is protected. Everything is great. And then we just want to shoot up and be everything we're supposed to be and everything to be perfect. I hate to tell you this, guys, but you can't. Right? We just cannot grow in perfect conditions. It's the experience when we're really growing. It's those experiences that we're learning. Those experiences are vital to our growth. And that was something that James and Paul and Jesus all knew. They said, bring it on. Jesus took himself to that wilderness. He said, let's go, bring on the testing, because I know after this testing, I'm going to endure it. And it's going to build my character, it's going to build my hope, and it's going to build who I'm becoming. So take me through the testing season, God. Be happy about it. It says that we should be happy about it. In Psalms 92, it says that the godly will prosper like palm trees. They'll prosper like palm trees. And if you know palm trees grow extremely tall. But palm trees have this very unique root system that their roots have to go down extremely deep. If they were to have root systems like other trees and they went out like this, they would be shallow in this sand. And when those hurricane winds and things would come, those trees would get knocked down so easily. But instead, palm trees, these long, skinny toothpick trees, to me look like they would do the worst during a storm. Right now, oak trees look sturdy. They got the big trees, right? Sometimes they're this big around. Let's put some oak trees on the beach. The reason you don't see oak trees on the beach is because their root systems are shallow. You see palms on the beach though, because their root systems are deep. And they're so deep that they can withstand these hurricanes. We go and we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars building these giant, beautiful homes on the beach. We pour concrete and put the piers in them so they won't be knocked down. But one hurricane can just knock those houses down like nothing. But those palm trees never go anywhere. Sure, sometimes they bend and flex, and sometimes they get thrown around. But as soon as the storm's over, those palm trees look like they've never even been through a storm because their roots are so deep. They're there just standing firm. And I think that's what God calls us to do in those storms. He calls us to stand firm. In fact, that's exactly what Jesus said. I love this translation. It says, this is Jesus talking. He says, stand firm and you will win life. You want to win at life? Everyone does. Then you got to stand firm. It says, when you stand firm, you will win at life. And it's easy to look at that and go, Pastor Steph, you don't think I'm trying to stand firm? Of course, I want to stand firm. But I feel like we got a little insight from Paul on standing firm. Here's what he says. He says, therefore, take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand, stand. That's a phrase my dad used to always use. Having done all to stand, stand. And I got to watch him through the course of this ministry. I got to watch him stand during tough seasons. And he'd say, well, having done all to stand, I'll stand. Because he knew that the season might get crazy and it might get rocky, but that he had done everything he knew to do to stand, therefore he could stand. And I think sometimes we want to think we're standing and we want to think we've done all to stand, but we really haven't done all to stand. It says to take up the whole armor of God, and one of the first things it says is it says you have to gird your waist with truth. This is the truth, right? This is the truth, but sometimes our conversations and sometimes the words that come out of our mouth don't sound anything like the truth. It sounds like we'll never make it through this. It sounds like this is the worst day ever. It sounds like I can't stand that person. It sounds like if I do one more day like this, I'm gonna lose my mind. It doesn't really sound like the truth. So have we really done all to stand, like Paul said? See, when Paul first started, he was a little rocky. He said, I just kept doing all these different things. I just don't know what I'm doing. But as he continued to grow and mature, he goes, oh, there's something to this. Standing's not easy. Standing is something you gotta be real intentional about. And you gotta dig deep. And you gotta guard yourself. So he talked about that whole armor of God. And after he said, having done all to stand, he went into it. He said, well, it's the truth. You gotta make sure that you know the truth and you speak it. And then he says, having done all, put on the breastplate of righteousness. Check your heart. Is your heart pure? Are you every day, are you going, God, I just want to surrender my heart to you. God, I surrender my heart, my will, my emotions, everything to you. God, guard my mouth, make sure that it's coming from your truth. God, I gotta stand today. So God, help me, guard me, protect my heart. It says to shod your feet with peace. God, I might not feel peace, but I'm gonna talk peace. I'm gonna choose to walk in peace today. I'm gonna speak peace over my life, peace over my car, peace over my family. I'm going to shod my feet with peace. I love that it's on your feet because as you walk, you take peace with you. Every step you take is a step full of peace. And it might not start that way, but I do know this. I know when you're intentional about something and what you focus on, you become. And I want peace to walk with me. It says here, the shield of faith that's gonna help to quench those fiery darts we talked about at the beginning of today's message. It says, take the helmet of salvation. We know what salvation means for us. Salvation means we won. Salvation means there's no more condemnation. It doesn't mean I walk in shame. I have a helmet on that blocks me from shame and condemnation because I'm loved and I'm valued and I'm free. So I put that on my head every day to block me. And then it says the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. This is where you're getting your truth from. Some of us want to speak the truth, but we don't know what the truth is because we didn't read the truth, right? We gotta have these tools in our tool bag so we can say that I've done all to stand. Those seasons are tough. And if you're trying to stand on your own, it's gonna be really hard. Paul wasn't standing on his own. He was fully dressed in armor. He was making sure every hole was taken care of. He says that he prayed with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit. He was praying every day. This is a tough season. It doesn't mean I stop going to church. It doesn't mean I stop spending time with God. It means I gotta do it more. I gotta do it more because I need some protection. I've gotta stand through this storm. He says, being watchful to this end with all perseverance and supplication for the saints. Man, I'm gonna stay in this posture to the end. I'm persevering through this season because I know that this season is going to just lead to the next season. And I think that was something neat for Paul. He had this revelation that his season was only going to get better because he knows what happens in the end, he's going to win. And so he said, whatever happens on this earth, he actually at one point said, I prefer to die today because I could go be with Jesus. But for your sake, I'm gonna stay and help to continue write the New Testament, right? He says, for your sake, I'm gonna stay because I've got work to do. And if it's in prison, I'll do it in prison because I'm standing on something and there's this hope that lies ahead of me. And that's kind of the third thing I want to talk about today. If you really want to be able to stand, you're going to have to remember what you're standing for. And because that's what Jesus did. It says here in Hebrews, it says we do this by keeping our eyes on Jesus, the champion who initiates and perfects our faith. Because of the joy set before him, he endured the cross. There's that endurance again. But it said it was because of the joy that was set before him. I think sometimes we don't remember the joy that's set before us. Sometimes I think we forget the promises that we're standing for. What are we standing for? We're standing for our family to be reunited. We're not letting go. And even though today I want to strangle my spouse, I'm not letting go. I'm not giving up because of the joy set before me. I want restoration in my home. Man, I know my kids are teenagers and they're awful. But it doesn't matter. I'm standing for the joy set before me. Because in another season, my family is going to be strong and healthy, and my kids are gonna be close to me. I'm standing firm. I'm not getting distracted. I'm not getting pulled down. My roots are going deep, and I'm standing firm. I remember what I'm standing for. Man, I think some of us need to remember the purpose that we stand for. I think oftentimes when we're young, we have these dreams and these aspirations, and then real life happens and we begin to slowly let those dreams and those aspirations go. But maybe those things that you begin dreaming about when you were a kid, that's when your mind and your heart were the purest. Maybe those things were the things that God was planting inside of you. Maybe it's time that you take a stand, even though your life and your circumstance don't look like those dreams are gonna come to pass and those purposes that God gave you in your life. But maybe you keep standing and go, I'm gonna trust God, those still are. And so when times are hard and times are frustrating and it looks like those purposes will never come to pass, I can stand here because I remember the joy that's set before me. I got my eye on the prize. I got my eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and the finisher of my faith, and the hope that's set before me. I can endure. This is tough, but it's good for me. And I'm gonna endure for what's set before me. I'm gonna be an endurer. And the thing is oftentimes I think that God will anoint us for something before it's time to appoint us for something. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Last week we talked about Joseph. Man, when Joseph was just a little boy, age 17, that's when he was anointed to do something. God gave Joseph a dream. Joseph's ready. He's gonna be like those biosphere trees. He was gonna shoot up out of there. But instead, he's ready. He runs to his brothers and he's like, guess what I just found out? Y'all are all gonna kiss my feet one day. Yada, 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 right? That's what he did. That's what he did. And all of a sudden, the seasons of testing came. The wind started blowing and Joseph wasn't ready and he got knocked down. But then Joseph goes, I'm doing this season differently. This is a season of testing. So from 17 to 30 was the testing season. That was 13 years of Joseph knowing he was anointed, but he was not yet appointed. Y'all know David's one of my favorites. David's story is a lot like Joseph's. David was anointed to be king at 12 or 13 years old when he was just a boy. You're anointed to be king, David. You're going to change the world. Here you go. Now go back out and do some sheep. Just go in that field. Your brothers are gonna get promoted. Your brothers are significant. All these things are happening that are too important that you can't be involved in. You just go back to your pasture. But that season of testing is the season he was developing. That was the season he was learning to put on that armor of God. That was the season he learned about the breastplate of righteousness. That every day he would say, God, just create in me a clean heart, oh God, and renew a right spirit in me, God. That was David's prayer for years on that hillside. And then when testings would come and the lion would show up, he would be able to take down the lion. And David began to grow. Every day he grew a little stronger and a little bigger and a little more confident in his God. That season of appointing is coming, but there's a season ahead of that testing to get you ready. And that's what Jesus went through. And Jesus knew when he was a newborn, he was on a mission. Same thing for Jesus. It wasn't until he was 30 years old that he would actually start his ministry. Maybe there's something about 30. All these guys getting promoted at 30 here. That was it, man. So I don't know what's happening in your life, but don't forget the joy that's set before you. And that's what was happening with all these guys. Man, that's why God told Joseph. That's why they told David, because he knew they were gonna go through a test season and he wanted them to endure for the joy that was set before them. David, do not give up. One day you will be king and the Messiah will come from you. Don't give up, David. When you're in the cliff, when you're running from Saul, do not give up. Joseph, when you get thrown into slavery and then you get accused of a false accusation and then you get thrown in prison, all of those years, Joseph, don't give up, because there's gonna be a season of appointment and it's going to be right on time. Because at the same time, Joseph, I'm getting you ready, it's the same time I'm getting your family ready. It's the same time I'm changing Pharaoh's heart. It's the same season. And all these are gonna collide at one time. And when you do this, Joseph, you are going to save your family lineage. You're going to save your family. And David would come from the lineage of that family. Jesus would come from that family. So if Joseph wouldn't have stayed strong in the testing and would have faltered to the tempting, God would have had to get somebody else. It wouldn't have been Joseph's name in this book, it would have been Billy. Everyone in this book that we know their name, it's because they made it through the testing. We're not remembering the people that fell to the temptation. The people that make a difference are the ones that stand firm in the testing.
Thank you for watching with us. I hope you enjoyed the message today. We always want to give you an opportunity to be a part of what God is doing. So if you'd like to give, you can text LS Church to 77977 or head to our website at lschurch.tv. Again, thanks for watching, and we hope you'll join us again next week.